Welcome, everyone. I know people are just trickling in, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Katie Capuzzo, Director of Community at WISE, and together we're a global community dedicated to empowering the next generation of women in sales. Huge thanks to our partners for making events like this possible, and special thanks to PitchBook Data and Contentful for sponsoring today's event. We know that you can be a leader regardless of title, but really developing your viewpoint and guiding principles takes intentionality. And we're going to be discussing the journeys of these two panelists today and how they got to their leadership perspectives in today's panel. So joining me in that conversation is Andie Worsley, Director of East Coast Account Management at PitchBook Data, and Caitlin Rashbaum, Senior Manager of Customer Success at Contentful. So Andie, tell us a little more about yourself.
Yeah, hi. So Andie Worsley. I have been with PitchBook for the last 8 years in a few different roles, kind of navigating up through leadership. I currently am overseeing our East Coast account management function, and I manage 4 managers today and about 25 individual contributors that I'm responsible for, leading our revenue generating teams that are responsible for both renewals and upselling our client accounts.
Wonderful. Caitlin?
Awesome. Yeah, so my name is Caitlin Rashbaum. I am a senior manager of customer success at Contentful. I've been at Contentful for about 2.5 years, but my background has been really all in SaaS, primarily startup to mid-sized companies. At Contentful, our customer success team is really responsible for all kind of customer facing activities, product kind of updates, QBRs, and then also renewals and expansion portion. Right now I manage a team of 8 individual contributors. I was actually just promoted, so I will be managing 2 managers as well beginning in September.
Congrats. Perfect timing
Awesome.
for this
Yeah.
panel. And I think we'll dive into a little bit about that promotion experience as well throughout the conversation. So thanks again for joining everyone throughout. Let us know where you're tuning in from in the chat. And if you do have any questions, there's a little question mark box at the bottom of the screen. You can drop it in there and we'll get to that during the Q&A portion. So let's get into it. This is a question for both of you, and Andie, we'll have you kick it off. If you were to leave the room, how would your team describe your leadership style?
It's a great question. I really had to think about about this one. I think to put it succinctly, I hope that they would say high standards, real support. Kind of digging into that more. I really believe that people thrive when they're both challenged and supported. I think my leadership style is grounded in setting clear expectations, having high accountability, but also a strong commitment to helping people succeed. I think pushing for excellence while understanding that I'm responsible for providing the right level of guidance for each person to meet their individual goals is so important. And just really helping them each grow into the potential that I see in them, because sometimes I might see something more in them than what they might see in themselves in that moment.
I love that. Caitlin, what about you?
Yeah, I love that, Andy. I think I try to reflect a lot of that as well in my leadership style. I think it's funny because much of my team is on this call, so I could ask them to chime in, but I think probably many of them would say maybe empathetic, but direct. So I think, I really see the human element, I think in leadership and try to kind of consider everything that my team has going on, also in their personal lives and also maybe, other projects they have going on outside of their day-to-day responsibilities. However, we do have a job to do. There's a job that they were hired for, and that is my expectation that they perform it and perform it well. So yeah, I think at a high level, that's how I think about it.
Well, first of all, if you're on Caitlin's team and you want to plus one that in the chat, feel free, or Andie's,
Or
to
a thumbs down.
elaborate. Yeah, I think that's great. And I think from both of those perspectives, I guess I'm just curious, when you maybe absorb new team members or hire new folks onto your team, how do you establish that trust and mutual accountability? And also, like, I expect a lot from you early on.
That's a great question. We actually just went through a big reorg at PitchBook on our account management and CS team. And so I'm actually managing 3 new to me managers. Only one of them came with me from our last life of a few months ago. And then with that also absorbed a lot of new team members that don't know my style and don't know my expectations. And so it's been a lot of trying to lay the groundwork. Hopefully I've done a good job at that so far. Just being open, honest, and available. I think another aspect of that is one, your managers, I'm managing managers, so I work with them more closely. But then when it comes to the broader team, what's trickling down from me to their managers is impacting them. And so just trying to get in front of them as much as possible, whether it's in large scale meetings, showing them that I'm in the weeds with them, and then just doing skip levels as well, just to kind of get to know kind of what you were saying, Caitlin, that human element. What else do you have going on in your life that I should know about to ensure that I'm best able to set your manager up to support you to reach your goals?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with all of that. I think I give my team, I just try to give my team a lot of autonomy. I, remember myself kind of as an individual contributor for many years, I really hated micromanagers. So I try to avoid that as much as possible. And I think kind of what I tell my team is, hey, I trust you until you give me a reason not to. I set, we have our KPIs, we have our standards and expectations within the role. And if somebody very clearly isn't performing those, so, not meeting their NRR goals, or, very clearly not, having QBRs, having touch points with their customers, and can't answer questions that I ask them about their customers, that's when we'll kind of investigate further and come up with next steps to, improve that. But I think it's really kind of letting people, kind of be independent as much as possible.
Yeah. And we'll talk a little more in the conversation around what leadership looks like when you are having those difficult conversations, and how sometimes that can bring out a different side to your leadership perspective even. So we'll get into that in a bit. But Andie, for this kind of laying the groundwork of your background, you spent a decade as a teacher before moving into SaaS sales.
Yeah.
So looking back on that, what lessons about leadership have transcended these roles, which feel very different and on the surface of these roles? And are there principles or instincts that you developed in the classroom that show up in how you lead today?
Yeah, I love this question. I could have mentioned this in my quick about me at the start, but yeah, I got my degree in education, went straight into the classroom teaching fourth grade for many years, got my master's in educational leadership, and was just on this trajectory of education for a long while. And I primarily taught fourth grade, so 10-year-olds. And then in my last couple of years, I actually transitioned to a job at the district level, helping elementary teachers integrate technology into their curriculums, which was the job that really kind of ended that chapter for me, and thought maybe I should move on to trying to accomplish something else, and kind of restarted a career in SaaS sales at PitchBook 8 years ago. But I think at the basis of this question is just they're not that different. And again, I think on the surface, you might think, well, they're completely different. Like one, you're, wheeling and dealing with clients and money and all of these things. But on the other side of the coin, you're dealing with people's children. You're dealing with their lives and their development, kind of setting the stage for a high stakes stage for their future. And so they're really not all that different. I think at the end of the day, what I've learned in the last 16 years of my professional life is just that people are people, and leadership is leadership. Whether the people are 8 years old, 10 years old, 30, 60, they're not all that different in terms of what drives them, motivates them, how they like to be supported and led. I think a lot of the same structures just completely apply one-to-one, as simply as it can be. It just starts out by building trust, assessing skill and will, really putting a strategic plan in place for each individual to help them achieve. And that's what we do right now with our teams, right? We're putting those KPIs in place. We're making sure the expectations are set, and we're stepping in to lead them how they need to be led to achieve those goals. So whether those goals are learning to read at a higher reading level throughout the year, learning new math skills, or understanding our client base, how to be a stronger negotiator, and how to hit your NRR targets. Like they're not all that different in terms of the strategies behind them. And I think some other things too that feel really applicable is one, public speaking, right? We're on this panel today, which just feels safe over Zoom, but a lot of being a leader is standing up in front of people and addressing them. And sometimes you're addressing a resistant audience. And I'll tell you something, that a room full of 25, 10-year-olds is a very resistant audience at times. And so I learned a lot about what it takes to be engaging, how to approach people, and really try and, pull them in to what I'm trying to message to them. And so it's, starting with focusing on the why. Everyone wants to understand the why behind what's driving things. Again, whether you're in fourth grade or you've been in a career for 40 years. A couple other things I think that just come to mind too is conflict resolution. Whether you're dealing with conflict on the playground or you're dealing with conflict between peers at work, it's not all that different, right? You're trying to seek to understand, you're trying to listen to all angles, and you're trying to come up with a solution that's fair and makes sense for everyone moving forward. Working collaboratively and just being agile and being able to pivot quickly, like all those things are so applicable. And so I think there's just so many foundational skills, no matter what career you started in, that can be very, very helpful as you're either embarking on an individual contributor path or even into leadership.
Mm-hmm. I love that perspective too, because it can often feel, if you're changing industries completely, like a complete reset.
Yeah.
And there's still so many valuable things you're taking with you in that transition. So that's great to hear. You mentioned the public speaking piece. And again, like a room full of 10-year-olds would be very hard to keep their attention. And I think sometimes in a virtual setting or even in a presentation, if you're in office, you can feel like you're really grasping at straws to get people's attention. What are some of those tips that you have for that, or maybe one tip that would be helpful for us to know?
Yeah, I think one thing that I try and do consistently is just in reading the room, addressing what I'm seeing, right? So whether it's you're trying to lead a team meeting or a larger segment meeting, and you can see people are distracted, they're on their computers, they're looking down, they're not engaging with you, just kind of like pausing and addressing it and saying, hey, it seems like I don't have the full attention of everyone. And I feel like what we're trying to discuss is important, and here's why. It's kind of like using that as a chance to reset. It's kind of naming things head on is one thing that I think, can be really effective, right? I mean, some people might feel called out by it if they know they were the ones doing whatever, but it does just reset the room of we're here to work together and engage together, and just not being afraid to address those situations. And then I think also just maybe in reading the room, deciding to be again agile and pivot right in the moment and say, hey, I came here planning to talk to you guys about this. Seems like you're not engaged. What is on your mind? Because maybe there's something else that I don't know about that's plaguing you guys right now that you're concerned about. And maybe we should actually pivot this 30 minutes we have together to what's most top of mind for you.
Hmm. Yeah, that's helpful. Maybe I'll give
Yeah.
that a try next time.
Yeah, same. I think that takes a lot of confidence, I think, to have that kind of direct of a conversation. It's something that I even struggle with sometimes, if I notice that maybe I don't have full attention, I am hesitant to be so direct. So I really respect that, Andie. I'm going to try to take that away as well.
Yeah, I would imagine nowadays with phones, with compute, like there's so much distraction that can
Yeah.
happen. And then if also if you're in a virtual meeting, you don't know what's happening around the person sitting outside of their tiny screen. So to really reset that conversation, I do think is really valuable.
Yeah.
Caitlin, kind of oppositely, you've spent your entire career in sales. And again, we all know it's a function that teaches persistence, negotiation, how to handle constant change. The list goes on. Which of those frontline sales skills have been most meaningful to you in really shaping the leader you are today? And then have you had to unlearn or reframe any of those as you stepped in to lead more effectively?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think maybe even outside of sales, of course, in sales as well, but I think the constant change piece that you mentioned, Katie, is really something that's been invaluable, I think, in leadership. I think a lot of that, again, outside of sales, actually comes from working at, early to mid-stage tech companies that are constantly changing, their structure, their leadership, their vision. And with that, especially being in sales, you're having to change your messaging and kind of what you're going to market with. So I think I've taken that into leadership to kind of gain the ability to adjust the messaging to still inspire my team with something that might be completely different than we had shared with them 6 months ago, and kind of, reframing it as a positive, which oftentimes it is. So I think that that's been a valuable skill to learn. I think in terms of persistence as well, I think actually that might be something that I've had to unlearn a bit from being really a frontline seller. Oftentimes, especially early in my sales career, I really struggled to walk away from a deal, and my boss would say, this is a dead end. You're kind of, this isn't going to happen. And so I had to relearn that in my sales career. And then I think unlearning that also helped me kind of in my leadership ability, because especially with individuals maybe on the team that might just not be right for the role, or might not be kind of improving in the way that you need to see them improve. Again, the human element is something that's really, really hard for me about leadership. And so pivoting away maybe from an individual for the betterment of the team and kind of the company's success is something that I think unlearning that from sales has benefited my leadership ability as well.
Yeah, I could see that. Andie, have you had a similar experience when you think of it that way around the persistence piece?
I think so. And I think a lot of it comes to just from like as you progress in leadership, you have to have a business hat on, not a personal hat on a lot of the times, right? And so that can be hard to trickle down to people who are looking at their own bottom line, right, for their book of business and what they're trying to accomplish. But that's something that I really focus on for myself, is always trying to think big picture, what is the impact, and making decisions based on that. And it's one of the first things I try and kind of like train my managers on as well, because it's very easy to get drugged down a little bit too if you're working with somebody that's feeling a certain way and their point's valid and you understand it, and you're kind of it's easy to fall into those habits with them, but being able to pull yourself out and say, like, let me look at this from a business perspective. And, maybe things do need to uh, change that we don't want to move on to other things, but it looks different, right? That persistence, I think, depending on the role.
Hmm. I think along the lines of some of what you said, Caitlin and Andie, you echoed is like individually things can feel so big to that direct report. Like this is taking up my entire day, my entire brain space. But for you not to get drug into that necessarily and still being able to see the forest for the trees and not match that energy, I think would be a big learning and something I've had to learn along the way of like, not everything is this huge fire drill that that person feels in the moment. So being able to empathize with them while also helping them move forward, I think it is an interesting thing to think about.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think I'll oftentimes tell my team, which, probably my senior leadership wouldn't love, but, when they are really kind of ingrained in this problem, I'm like, we're not curing cancer. This is software and it's really not saving anyone's life. So it's going to be okay. 1 month from now, you're really not even going to think about this. So I think that's a good point, Katie. It's kind of being able to step back and help your team step back from a situation as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Andie, speaking of some of these scenarios that we just chatted through, do you have any examples or really standout moments in your career that have shaped the leader you are today?
Yeah, I think there's so many, right? I mean, every single day I feel like I'm evolving and changing as new information comes in or I experience something new. So I was trying to think about one kind of really impactful thing, and one situation that I think really has helped me find my voice and my confidence and learn to have tough conversations head on. Popped up for me. So just like several years ago, I was in a position where I was able to interview to take on more. So I had been managing ICs. This role opened up to manage managers, and I went for it with my all. I laid everything on the table and really pursued it. And I moved into that role. It's the role I'm in today. I've been in it for 3 years. But in that transition for me that I was so excited about, I actually took on the responsibility of managing someone who I had reported to years prior. And so that's an interesting situation to be in. I wasn't completely unaware on how to attack it, because even when I was back as a teacher, I was a very motivated teacher, and they could see me coming from a mile away. And some of those more tenured teachers were like, "What is she trying to do now?" But I put my all in and became a team lead of teachers, and a lot of them had been teaching for decades. And here I am now kind of in charge of the team and the vision of what we're going to do. And managing that as a young teacher was really hard. And I don't think I did a good job at it. And I backed down a lot and backed away and was very timid. And so when I came across this situation that I had to navigate, I kind of decided I'm going to approach this differently. I could see the similarities between the two. And I knew I had the potential to be steamrolled or to not be taken seriously. And so I set clear and direct communication and just kind of said, I'm going to be consistent in all the things that I'm doing. I also had to take a step back and like trust that the committee that promoted me into this role had the confidence in me that I was going to be able to do it. Because talk about imposter syndrome.
I can only imagine.
That role, right? You know, we all have it. I still have it, but it was really bad for a while. Just like, okay, I somehow tricked everyone into thinking that I should be doing this, and now I'm faced with this with a challenging situation. And so I kind of was able to put that to the side as best as possible and just work every single day on building confidence in myself, my decision making, my vision. And I did not do everything right. That is 100% the case. There's a lot of aspects now looking back 3 years later that I would have changed. But I think a lot of the things I learned from that is, one, try and put the imposter syndrome away, try and drive your confidence in yourself that you know what you're doing and you're working hard and you have the business's best interest at heart at all times. And the other big takeaway I learned from that, as I was moving up the ranks in leadership, is I don't have to do everything myself. I think when I first moved into that role, I was like, okay, well, they put me here, so now I have to do everything on my own. And I really learned to lean into my leader and ask for help. And I think that really changed the way that I was kind of approaching it before, because I was really trying to prove myself and I can do all this and I don't need to ask for help. And I was very quickly put in a situation where I needed support, I needed guidance, and I needed to build my confidence to ensure that I was moving things forward.
Mm-hmm.
How did you differentiate kind of what you felt comfortable asking your leader for help with versus maybe being a bit more nervous about that, looking like you didn't know what you were doing?
Honestly, I didn't navigate it well, is what I would say. And that's one of those big learning lessons. I think I tried for too long to handle it myself. And I'd go home and talk to my poor husband, be like, I don't know what you want me to do. I'm like, I think just listen. But, just like trying to do all of that. And I think it got to a point where I then was so reactive and needing support that I couldn't even articulate exactly what I needed. And so I think that's a big part of it is I wish I had been more vulnerable in that time and said, hey, this situation's happening, these examples are happening, I need support and I need you to step in and help me sooner than I did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you didn't necessarily have a solution every time, that you were kind of like, here's what I'm experiencing. I think from my perspective, that tends to happen where I internalize it all. I let it get to the stress level of like, I'm handling it until I'm not. And then the result of that is an overflow of all of this stuff that they're like, oh, I could have jumped in a lot sooner to help you had I known, and it never would have gotten to that point. But sometimes I don't feel like I have the answers to even approach my manager or leader because I haven't gathered the perfect solution yet. So as managers, how do y'all approach that, I guess, with your team when they come to you with situations they're experiencing? Do you expect them to have a solution or an answer when they're coming to you, or how do you expect them to navigate that?
I say probably more often than I should, bring me more solutions than problems. But in that, it's fine if you're bringing me problems and we just need to talk through them. I just wish that the ratio would be more solutions oriented than just kind of venting all the problems without a clear indicator. And so I think there's a good balance is what I ask for in my leaders. In some days or weeks, it might be more like, okay, we're just solving problems together all the time. And then we might get into a groove where they're just kind of informing me of the solutions they've come up with to approach things, more of like a gut check. I think it's going to ebb and flow just depending on situations that are happening that day, that week, that month, that quarter.
Yeah, I agree. I think one thing another thing that I've really had to unlearn in leadership is kind of just giving them the answer. So when people, team members would come to me with a problem and, I had 14 other things going on and I would just say, yeah, just do this. And I've really had to kind of learn that they're not going to learn unless we come up with a solution together. So even if they come kind of without a solution, I'll say, well, what do you think we should do here? And, kind of try to guide them so that we can jointly come up with a solution. So that's kind of how I navigate it these days. But I agree with you, Andie. I think oftentimes initially when somebody's reporting to you, it's kind of a learning for them as well, that the expectation is to come with a solution, because we're not just going to give them the answer to a problem or a solution to a problem.
Yeah.
Well, that helps with critical thinking too, to make sure the person's thinking through these scenarios, and could eventually help with what you see in them for possible promotions or other roles, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Caitlin, we spoke about the surprises that have come with management, and managing up to advocate for your team was one of those for you. Tell us about that learning and then how it comes up practically.
Yeah. So, I think a lot of first line management is thankless sometimes, frankly, because I think there's a lot of things that are maybe happening behind the scenes that your team might not realize you're advocating for them with. So let's say, just to give an example. So let's say, a comp plan, we're actually in, comp planning right now for the next fiscal year. So, if the comp plan is changing, or if spiffs are changing, really not in our best interest, it's really on us as managers to speak to, our VPs, our CFO about why we shouldn't do that, or why we should do it a different way. And so I guess going back to maybe the solution that we were just talking about, or solution-led thinking, it's kind of coming up with a specific talk track. And this is something that, I've learned throughout my career, because I think early in management, I used to just come in really hot and say, this is not a good idea. Everybody's going to be really mad and quit. And that's not going to get anything done. So now it's kind of coming up, taking a step back for myself, coming up with the reasons why, this isn't a good path forward for the team and for the business. I think a lot of times it's kind of taking the team out of it and reframing it as like business first, and saying, here's how this is going to benefit the business to actually do it this other way. So coming up with kind of, bullet points around why we should be doing it a certain way, and then coming with, a solution of why don't we do it this way instead. And then, 9 times out of 10, that will kind of open up for a larger conversation that will typically kind of meet somewhere in the middle of what they initially wanted, and then kind of what my solution was.
Is it hard for you as a leader? You know your team best. You have these personal and professional relationships with them. Is it hard for you to separate that in these conversations with leadership, maybe around something where you recognize that those promotions aren't going to happen in the time that your direct report may be expecting that, to remove that personal element and really keep it business focused?
It is challenging. It's something, again, that I've had to learn throughout kind of my leadership career. My current boss, our VP of customer success, has been really kind of game changing in how I think about that, and kind of saying, hey, even though you like this person and think that they're doing great work, unless they have kind of proven results that we can bring to our CFO and say this person deserves a raise and a title bump, it's not going to happen, right? Because think about how many other managers are having the same conversation. So I think that is something that I've learned, is that, hey, if we're really talking about a promotion here, we need to show tangible ways that you are improving the business.
Mm-hmm. I didn't plan this, but that flows very nicely to my next question for Andie, which is about promotions. So, what advice do you have for those that are seeking a promotion, be it IC to management, or maybe changing departments, or just getting a more senior IC position?
Yeah, I actually was on a skip level yesterday with someone and talking about this exact topic. So very timely in how I would approach. But I think the thing I've always said to people, I think I even said this on the last WISE panel I was on, is just you are your own best advocate, period. That's something you need to take with you throughout every part of your life, whether it's at work or at home, dealing with family things or out with social situations. Like, you are your own best advocate. You cannot sit back and expect that your manager is going to read your mind and know what you're hoping for, what your dreams are, what you're working towards. You also can't sit back and expect that your manager is always going to be mentioning your name in the right rooms. You can hope that they are, right? And you can hope that you're putting in all the right work and the right efforts for that to happen, but you can't expect it. So it all really comes back down to you and how you're showing up for yourself. And so I think one thing that is really important for people, and I hope people recognize, especially early in career, is just you've got to build a personal brand within your organization. You have to talk to people and you have to make sure that your name is being mentioned in rooms because you're building those connections. I think another aspect of that is just you've got to meet with people who might feel like out of reach, right? Maybe it's your manager's manager. Maybe it's somebody at the MD level that you've never talked to, or it's somebody in the ELT that you've never talked to. You've got to put yourself out there. Obviously, make sure you're prepared if you reach out to have a conversation, that you're ready to guide it. But I want people to also realize that it's in everyone's best interest in the business to see people succeed. And we want that. There's no downside to building those high level connections because we all have the same goal. If you're succeeding, I'm succeeding, my manager is succeeding, and kind of trickles all the way up the chain. So just having those conversations, I think, can be so beneficial. It's not going to get you something tomorrow. It's not like you're going to go meet with somebody high level and say, I want a promotion. And they're going to say, oh, well, since you asked for it, here you go. But it's just building those connective tissues in the organization with people who are making the decisions. They're the ones building out for 2026 planning. They're the ones thinking about how many roles we need for certain things. And you want your name to come up in those situations. I think the other thing that I would say is just you've got to build and maintain a brag book about yourself. It's kind of like a document off the side of all the great stuff that you're doing. Because a lot of things you do, nobody knows about it unless you tell them. And so I think just documenting it and having it there so that when you do have maybe a meeting with a more senior stakeholder within the business, you can say, hey, these are all the things I've done. Maybe you're having a quarterly review. You can bring all of those things up really easily. Or if a role does open up, bam, I can now pull out all these examples of things I've done for those interviews. And so I think that's just a crucial aspect of keeping yourself fresh on what you're doing and being able to share that out with other people. And just at the end of the day, make it really easy for your peers, for your leader, and for their leader to just see the things you're doing, and that will help you along the way.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree. And I think it's a very similar conversation to one that I have with my team oftentimes. And I think particularly as women, sometimes it's tough for us to brag about ourselves because we've kind of had to, we've been told our whole lives that we shouldn't be doing that, at least in my experience. So I think, oftentimes I will talk to, especially the women on my team, and say, hey, I think number one, to your point, Andie, I need to know, and my manager needs to know, my manager needs to know all these great things that you're doing. We have no way of knowing if you don't tell us, typically. And I think there's a way to reframe it, right? So if you are self-conscious about saying to, our SVP of customer success, hey, I did X, Y, and Z, you can frame it as, hey, the team did, this great QBR, we got this great expansion, but kind of make clear your part in it and that you were driving it. So then you're kind of taking yourself out of the bragging about it part, but still making it clear that you are heavily involved and really kind of spearheading the whole, initiative. And that's kind of, at least in my professional life, that's how I've been a bit more comfortable talking about, my successes.
I'm not saying that everyone would be looking for a team lead role, or even if you have that on your teams, but if you were looking for that person that is like going to be leading your specific team in some capacity, what are some of those characteristics or qualities that you're looking for in their day-to-day work aside from like meeting their quota or KPIs?
Yeah. I would say, and I tell my team this, is really kind of going above and beyond, as cheesy as that is. I think, performing duties that really are outside of your exact job description. We're actually going through an internal interview process right now for a new manager on the CS team. at Contentful. And, the two finalists are people who are really kind of already performing manager duties, right? So the rest of the team really looks to them for mentorship, for, if we managers are unavailable, they are the go-to people, right? So kind of framing yourself as a leader on the team naturally, identifying projects or gaps maybe that the team needs. And, rather than kind of just telling your manager about that gap, coming up with a solution for it and maybe coming up with a little tiger team to go actually solve that problem. So I think really making the team better in a specific way that's not just kind of doing your everyday job.
Mm-hmm. Andie, I saw you nodding along to that. And
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it, right? It's just you're stepping up without being asked to, and you're kind of innately falling into the role that you want to do before you have it. I think that's so important. And not only does that set you up well for an interview process, but it also sets you up well for when you move into the role because you've kind of, to your point, Caitlin, already been doing it. And so just taking risks on yourself to step up in those ways. I mean, when we have managers go out on vacation or sabbatical, I love to see team leads step up and say, hey, can I actually lead the pod meetings? Can I meet with you to understand what I need to disseminate down to the team? Like I want to be in this role and test it out. It's also a good opportunity for people to understand if they like it or not, to be able to take on some of that stuff because management's hard. It's a lot harder than I think any of us probably thought it would be the first time we moved into it. So many different facets. And so just being able to have, little bits and pieces to test the waters before you move into a real leadership role, I think is so important.
yeah, that's great advice. A reminder for everyone, if you have questions, go ahead and drop them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen or just throw them in the chat, either way, and we'll get to them in just a few minutes. Before then, Caitlin, so we've talked a little bit about how some conversations can be difficult, and of course in management, that's bound to happen. So how do you navigate those tougher conversations with your direct reports? Like, do you have a philosophy around how you approach those?
Yeah, I think, transparently, that's definitely the hardest part about management to me is having those difficult conversations. But I think how I try to go about it is really putting myself into the conversation as well and kind of sharing maybe my past experience or a way that, I had the same problem or a very similar problem and kind of how I navigated it or how I learned from it. So rather than kind of saying, hey, you're doing this wrong and this is only you, right? Kind of making it a bit more approachable by saying, hey, I had a similar experience or, my former colleague had a similar experience and kind of here's how they went about it. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about, what I can be doing better to support you, what else you need from the company. I think making it clear that they're not on an island by themselves to kind of, either fix it or get fired, but, make clear that we're here to support them as a team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And then last question for both of you, and Andie, we'll start with you. In leadership, you're often balancing the needs of your direct reports and business objectives, like we chatted about earlier. So whether it be failure, burnout, or tough conversations, how do you personally get back to center?
Yeah, there's a number of different ways I try to approach this. I think there's a couple of isms that I personally just try and like remind myself of. Something you said, Caitlin, earlier. I was like, that's exactly what I was thinking as well when it comes to this question. Is just at PitchBook, we sell data. And an old colleague of mine, when I was having a particularly tough, probably week, maybe quarter, and I was really stressed out back when I was IC, she said to me with so much sincerity, no one's ever died over data. Like, it's not that serious. I'm just like, okay, bring me back to earth. Like, this is not that serious. I think that really resonated with me, what you said, Caitlin. And I think something else too, that one of my mentors that I have today said to me years ago, again, during a particularly stressful time, she said they wouldn't call it work if it wasn't. And I think that just can help ground me too, because it's not meant to be easy all the time. It's meant to have its ups and downs. It's meant to have challenges. That's what makes it rewarding at the end of the day. So I think those two isms I try and just like bring myself back down to if I feel myself starting to get a little bit out of control and the emotions taking over. I think other things too is just I love a good cry. Honestly, I cry a lot. I cry if I'm frustrated, if I'm mad, if I'm sad, if I'm happy. And sometimes just like a good cathartic cry on the way home on the PATH train can do myself some good and just kind of reset before I get home. I have two kids, they're 6 and 8. And, when I walk in the door at the end of a long day at work, if it's particularly challenging, I don't have the luxury of saying, I'm just going to go lock myself in my bedroom and pour a glass of wine and call it a day. Like I have to go home and now lead another team, my family, and make sure that we're getting everything done and accomplished. And so I think that can sometimes be good. I like listening to some good music on the way home just to try and decompress and kind of disassociate a little bit from the day. And then just, when I get home, trying to be as present as possible. Some days it's harder than others. We have like a new rule in my house. I'm not allowed to get Slack until after the kids go to bed, which is a very good rule that I should be better about enforcing for myself. But just remembering that that's what really matters, my time with my family. Everything at work is temporary and it'll still be there tomorrow to pick up on. So I think those are some things that have worked for me. Some days better than others.
I'm sure you're not the only one that has shed tears on the PATH train. But it's funny that you mentioned that because I have often had this conversation with my husband that what did people do before email where they could check it after they left work for the day? Like that thought to me is so overwhelming. Like, oh, I'm just going to end work and not look at it till the next morning. So I love that you're kind of putting in some of those boundaries. Maybe someday you're better at it than others, but I think
Yeah.
that's really important and important for all of us, regardless of the role that we're in. Caitlin, what about you? How do you kind of reset or get back to center after some of those tougher days?
Yeah, I think honestly, very similar to your answer, Andy. So I have a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. So similarly, very busy when I get home. But I think, I think honestly, becoming a mom has helped reframe things for me quite a bit. Because work really used to be, of course, like family, friends, husband, all of the above. But once I became a mom, I was like, oh wow, this is far more important than selling software to companies that have too much money anyway. So that is kind of how I think about it at the end of the day. And very similarly, when I come home and I see my kids, I'm like, okay, this is what matters. And whatever happened this day really isn't all that important realistically. And I think also I've kind of had a mindset really my whole career that, I'm happy to pivot and I'm happy to let myself pivot, right? So even if, I find in 6 months that, hey, the director role that I'm about to move into, I don't like it, or it's too much for me at this exact phase in my life. I'm okay going back to management. I'm okay going back to an IC role. Like honestly, that's all okay for me. So I think that really helps me not stress so much, and really realize that, career-wise, I'm gonna do what's best in my life, really for my family. And so that makes things a bit easier, I think.
Yeah, that's a healthy mindset. Thank you for sharing that. We did have a question come in, so if any other questions are out there, go ahead and drop them in now. It's in regards to managing up and how you would encourage people manage up to their managers. So, like, how do you prefer your direct reports bring things to you or give you feedback? What do you think works well?
Yeah, I think innately people are afraid to manage up in a lot of circumstances. And so for me, I try and force them to a little bit and just saying, like, what feedback do you have for me? What would you have done differently? I'm about to do this. Before I do it, what are your thoughts on it? And kind of like forcing the issue to have those conversations in terms of if I'm not giving them what they need, I need to know that and I want to know it early and often. I have adopted a mentality of managing up a lot in my time and getting to myself to where I am now. And I think having those candid, open conversations with leadership can help you build your career as well because you're able to have that reciprocal conversation back and forth. And so I hope it's clear with my managers because I ask them for the feedback often that it's very something that I want in kind of developing my career, but also theirs.
Mm-hmm. Caitlin.
Yeah, I think, yeah, similarly, and I think being able to to kind of, again, come with, some sort of positivity. So when you are managing up, rather than just coming across as complaining, coming from a place of, hey, I identified this problem and I really want us to solve it to make the company better, to make the team better, is, I think, a really important way to, when you are managing up, to just make sure that you're framing it in somewhat of a positive way, rather than kind of, I don't want to say like shitting on everything, but basically shitting on everything and all this other work that people probably have put into things. So I think just acknowledging the effort that, leaders, oftentimes senior leaders, do have an ego. So I think kind of, acknowledging the work that they and their leadership have done, but then also like making constructive recommendations.
Yeah. Great advice. Okay, a couple of questions have come in. This one is a more detailed situation, so I'll try to kind of summarize it a little bit. So this person is the only female leader in a group of 7 managers reporting to her director. Recently, she had a tough conversation where she put herself out there and felt let down with a promotion that got delayed for a second time. Post, let's see, post that, her director has been avoiding giving any new or strategic projects to work on and feels like it was taken personally. So, how would you navigate that situation where no longer the manager feels like a coach or mentor to them after she put herself out there and had this conversation?
Yeah. I think maybe my follow-up question would be, have you kind of addressed now that directly with your leader? Because it might be unintentional, but it might be intentional, and it might be subconsciously intentional of that leader. So I think just addressing it head on and saying, hey, since that conversation we had, I'm noticing X, Y, and Z. Obviously, I don't want that to be the case. So how can we jointly resolve it? I think just kind of ultimate transparency, I think oftentimes is the best way to go.
Yeah, I'd say the exact same thing. It's just like bring that data to the table, to the forefront, and say, hey, this is my perception of the situation, but I'd love to understand your perception of the situation, because they might be aligned. I might be spot on with what I think is happening, but I might be misaligned, and I would love to unpack that, because this is causing me to have stress or mistrust, and just kind of laying it on the table.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another question. How do you deal with motivation slumps, both as yourselves in leadership and then also coaching your direct reports?
It's a good
That's a
question.
tough one. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's all very individualized, or it needs to be. I think sometimes we try and address things too broadly, and it's like, well, maybe we're hitting the mark for, a fifth of the people, but what about the other people involved? And so like we'll try things sometimes, like we'll throw a spiff out there and say, okay, here are the metrics, try and hit these metrics, and if you do, you'll get this reward. Isn't that motivating? And maybe it is for some people, but not for all people. And so I think from a manager of IC's perspective, it's just really asking those specific questions about where they're at, what's currently energizing them and exciting them about their role, what's currently draining them about their role, and then addressing those things head on with the individual. Because I think that's where we can really get to kind of understand where people are at and how we can push them in different ways. Because if we just assume we're in sales roles, everyone's motivated by money, and we're throwing these incentives out there, hey, hit this metric, you get this money, and it's not yielding the results we're looking for. I think we need to take like a deeper look inside and say, let's get down to the specific root of the issues. And I think oftentimes it comes to just understanding, like, how do you actually feel about the role that you're in today? And is this something you want to continue, finding success in, getting better at? Is this something that you're just not motivated because you don't like the role anymore? And now we need to unpack that and figure out what's the best next step, or what we can do for you within the organization.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I think just, again, having a transparent conversation about it, making it clear, to your point, Andie, there are other opportunities, right? Most likely within the organization, if this isn't right for you. And then I think, just thinking about like my own at least, motivation slump, I think that's super natural. I think it is, motivation does ebb and flow, for me at least. So I do try to, when I'm feeling particularly unmotivated, I do try to maybe identify like an additional project, that might excite me, or a new like product, like contentful, we really leaned into personalization recently. So that's something that is exciting and that our customers are excited about. So I've kind of tried to align myself to that in some ways. So I think just finding something to maybe reinvigorate you about your job.
Yeah. All right, another one here. You both talked about the importance of autonomy, but sometimes as an individual contributor, as we know, you have to make a quick call in the moment. In those cases, what's best, asking for permission or asking for forgiveness?
I think it depends, obviously, what the stakes are in the
Mhm.
situation, but kind of a mindset that I try and implore upon my managers and their reps as well is just if the decision you're making is going to be positive for the business, then you're probably making an okay decision. It might not be the best decision, right? There probably might be other options out there that could have been better, but if at the end of the day you can feel confident that this was a good decision for the business, then you can rest easy on it, and then we can unpack and give feedback afterwards. Just kind of like putting that mindset on first.
Mhm.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think it's just using your best judgment. I think typically my guidance is ask for forgiveness. So I think if it's not something that you think you're going to get in a lot of trouble for from the business, and to Andie's point, if you think that it is, doing right for the business, I think I would always just say move forward with it. Because oftentimes asking for, layers of leadership to approve something, the problem or the opportunity has already gone. So.
Yeah, I love that intention piece. If the intention is what's best for the business, that can be a good rule of thumb. One more question here, and then we'll call it because we're almost at time. This person is curious to just hear more about the qualities that you see in someone that you think would be a strong future leader. You touched on this a little bit earlier, but is there anything else that you could elaborate on just as a whole?
I I think one thing that I oftentimes will look for is how to frame it. I guess the ability to have empathy and to work maybe cross-functionally. So I think, somebody can be a great individual contributor, meeting all of their goals, X, Y, and Z, but, maybe they do struggle to work with others throughout the organization, or maybe they are really, really just focused on kind of their, meeting their own quota, which is totally fine. And that's great. But, I think somebody, as we kind of said before, somebody who is, clearly ready for leadership in my mind is somebody who is, bringing others along with them, or kind of, if there are newer folks on the team or more junior people on the team, kind of asking them, just naturally mentoring them and kind of bringing them along with your success, I would say was what I look for.
Yeah, and I think something else too, just to dive deeper into, is what is the motivation behind wanting to be a leader? It's trying to unpack that. I think you don't get a ton of recognition as a leader. I think that's something that becomes more obvious the time and role. It's like you're not the one getting the recognition for a lot of the things. You're putting in a lot of hard work, and sometimes it does feel thankless. And so trying to understand like what is the motivation behind it, and really trying to unpack where that lies. If it's because I want to be at the top of the board and have the best team, like that could be positive for the business, but at what cost are you going to get there? And so it's just like, what is that driving force? Thinking about myself, even personally, I was a really well-performing IC before I moved into leadership. And that question got asked to me in my manager interview. And the answer is just that I don't enjoy those rushes anymore that come from closing those big deals. What I enjoy is helping someone figure something out, helping someone solve a problem, helping someone get to their next goal. And that shift kind of internally is what told me personally that I was ready for my move to management. So I think just unpacking what the motivations are and the intentions are, and also just ensuring that they fully understand like how their role is going to change when they make that big jump from being kind of a lone wolf IC to being a manager.
And to understand how their role will change, that kind of gets back to you saying before, have conversations, talk to people that are in the role that you want to be in.
Yeah.
Great. Perfect. Well, this was so helpful, y'all. Thank you for sharing your honest feedback on all the things and your perspectives. Thanks everyone for joining. We will send a recap tomorrow on the highlights from today's conversation and a recording from today's event, so you'll have access to rewatch all the good times. A few just announcements for the audience. We do have 2 in-person events upcoming in August. One is in Atlanta next week, and one is in Chicago the week following. So if you're in either of those areas or have folks in those areas that you think would want to attend, definitely share the invite with them. And then on August 14th, we have a virtual workshop led by Melissa Messino, VP of Messino Financial Group, and she's going to chat about ways to maximize your income as a salesperson. So you can sign up for all of those things through our website, womeninsalesEverywhere.com. All right, thanks again, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Caitlin and
I
Andie.
thank
Bye.
you.